everybody, it's Dan. Welcome back. And welcome to my 100th video, which is a milestone that I actually wasn't even aware I was approaching until I happened to check just prior to filming this video and saw that I was at 99 videos, and therefore by the time you're seeing this, we'll be at 100. So thank you all for your support over these 9 months or so that I've been doing this, because honestly, without your positive feedback, I don't think I would have had the motivation to make it this far. So I appreciate you all. And as this is my 100th video, I thought it'd be appropriate for me to maybe indulge myself a little bit and talk about a subject that I'm just very passionate about, which is the use of historical multi-part plastic sets in fantasy games, specifically Warhammer Fantasy, the Old World, the Ninth Age, games like that. And this is something I've been doing for close to 2 decades now. I did start my hobby career with Games Workshop products, like I imagine a lot of us did. But within a couple of years, I started branching out to different companies that were producing plastics for a number of reasons, both because they were, in some cases, substantially cheaper, but because a lot of them were putting out kits with subject matter that interested me, that I thought would be cool to kind of blend into my Warhammer games. But by the mid-2000s, it was also because Games Workshop had gravitated away from true multi-part plastic sets like we saw in 6th and 7th edition to really monopose kits that are broken up in multiple pieces, still plastic, still multiple parts, but not multi-part like you would see from some of these companies that I'm going to go over here. So for all those reasons, I pretty much swore off Games Workshop products, even though I was still playing Games Workshop games by the mid-2000s. So as this is something I've just had a ton of experience with and have done multiple army projects based on, I thought it would be something that I could share some insights on. And if for no other reason, because the feedback to my most and least favorite kits video suggested that a lot of people just weren't even aware that some of these companies or kits exist. And so I thought maybe as a community resource or as called a shopping guide, I could talk about my own experiences with this kind of project. So, and yeah, let me know if this is something by the end, if you find valuable, because I could talk about this subject kind of indefinitely for a whole host of different topics, like different Warhammer factions like Bretonnians or Dwarves or Undead, or I could talk about different historical time periods. For example, just medieval kits. We have a crazy number of them out now and upcoming here in the next few months. I could do Dark Age sets from different manufacturers, Ancients. I could do a whole probably a video just on Romans. So anyway, there's lots and lots of categories, kind of routes we can go down here. And as I said, I would be happy to talk about this kind of forever. So let me know. Anyway, let's real quick talk about scope like I did with the least and most favorite kits video. So first and foremost, this is exclusively going to focus on multi-part plastic sets for, again, Warhammer Empire is what I've been making a lot of these armies into. And so there's tons of 3D print options. If that's what you're after, there are much smarter channels than me that focus on that topic that could give you better insights into where to go. But there are definitely great 3D print options out there. There's also really good monopose plastic, from companies like Reaper, Privateer Press, things like that. But again, our focus today is going to be just on multi-part plastic. Really, historicals is what I've been using. And if you're not familiar with those, if you have maybe only dealt with Games Workshop products, the one disclaimer I'd like to make here at the beginning is that kind of regardless of which manufacturer you look at, they're all going to be smaller than Games Workshop products. Warhammer, certainly, the Old World products are scale creeping to the point where they're already filling those 25 millimeter bases that they've moved up to for a lot of the stuff that used to be on 20 millimeter bases. And that's because Games Workshop really doesn't make 28 millimeter models anymore. They haven't for a while. They're more 32 millimeter and heroic scale, so they have slightly larger heads and hands. So if that's something that bothers you, that's something I just wanted you all to be aware of, that if you've got a human faction facing off against another human faction using Games Workshop products, there is going to be a noticeable scale difference. It doesn't bother me at all, but if it bothers you, I just wanted you aware of it kind of out of the gates here. However, I have done a scale video on, at the time, it was the Big Six, Victrix, Perry, Wargames Atlantic, Fireforge, Gripping Beast, and Warlord, and showed that those all scale together very nicely, even if they don't necessarily scale well with Games Workshop products. So kind of whatever, you can mix and match these kits very readily, I think is what I'm trying to say with that. And on that topic, if you are going to use this as a kind of shopping guide, I should also suggest that you source your own bases. And that's because these different manufacturers use different bases of different thicknesses, of different styles. Like some of them use those Renature flats that come on, usually it's like multi-bases, like 40 by 40 millimeters. Some of them are 20 by 20. But some of them come on 25 millimeter squares. Some of them come on slightly thicker 20 millimeter squares. So your best bet for continuity's sake is to source your own bases on, even just like on eBay. And that way, that kind of regardless of which manufacturers you're using, everything's going to look like it's about the same height. So with those things out of the way, we're going to move by manufacturer here at the beginning. I do have a little surprise at the end, which well, I guess I'll share with you at the end. But otherwise, I'm going to go kind of from like most to least obvious options for alternate empire. But as I said, I want to move by manufacturer here. If I do miss some things, again, I think I don't want to get too in the weeds on like kind of fantasizing about like different projects that you can make, like a Dark Age themed Empire army. You could certainly do that, but I do want to keep this as narrow or focused as I possibly can, especially keeping in mind that I might be doing other videos down the road on different topics. So we got plenty to talk about here today, so let's dive in. So let's start with Perry miniatures, because I mentioned I want to go from kind of like most to least obvious options that are out there. And Perry miniatures, if you're not aware, sculpted a lot of the 6th edition Empire line, including the Dogs of War range that came out during the kind of late 90s. They did really certainly all the ones that kind of look historical. They did all of the sculpts. They did a lot of work for Foundry miniatures during that time period. They also did the Lord of the Rings line that came out, or at least like the first wave that came out in the early 2000s. So they've got a long history of producing fantasy miniatures, but historical miniatures that are used in a fantasy setting, or historical looking miniatures used in a fantasy setting. And likewise, they have a whole range of War of the Roses kits. There are 5 sets in total that could very readily be used for Warhammer Empire. And the first of those sets is their Bows and the Bills. It was the first one that they put out for this range, and as the name implies, it contains bowmen, longbowmen, and halberds, or billmen. And it's a cool set, and one of the strongest points of this War of the Roses line is that all of the sets mix together very, very well. So you can mix and match different heads, different weapon options from the different kits, and make a pretty diverse army, even just by picking up like one of each of these sets. The second one is their Mercenaries box, which is similar in style to the Bows and the Bills, but it comes with pikes, it comes with crossbows, and some kind of rudimentary handgun options. There are also on the command sprues a couple of like hand weapon options. I think there's one greatsword option. So there's, especially as I said, if you're mixing these kits together, it gives you a lot to play with from a army building standpoint. They also have their Foot Knights, which I mentioned is my favorite kit from Perry Miniatures that I've dealt with, that are all plate armored. There are polearm options and hand weapon options. No shields, if that's something that bothers you actually in any of these kits, because historically really shields weren't used anymore, but they do sell packs of shields separately. They've got a pretty extensive metal range as well, where you can pick up shields elsewhere if you really want to have shields on your War of the Roses figures for Warhammer Empire. For mounted kits, they have mounted men-at-arms, which are similar in armor design to the Foot Knights. It's a lot of like Italian and German Gothic armor, that they come with hand weapon and lance options. Again, no shields, but there is a detachable barding for the horses, which is pretty cool. And then they have a light cavalry option as well, which is really just a light version of the men-at-arms. Those come with like light lances and some bow options as well. I also think you might be able to mix in like crossbows. Maybe I just did that with some of the crossbow options from the Mercenaries box. So as I said, this is a really strong offering from Perry. They are probably the smallest of all the kits we're going to talk about today. So again, going back to scale, if you build an entire army out of these, I think it would work really well. I certainly don't have any issues with scales on the battlefield, certainly because we're talking about like 25 to 28 millimeter true scale compared to Games Workshop's like 32 millimeter heroic. So I think it works, especially if you're squaring off against like demons or something like that. Who cares about the size difference? But I wouldn't recommend, for example, that you try to like mix these figures into an existing Games Workshop Empire army. I just don't think the scale will look quite right mixing humans with humans of these different scales. But otherwise, yeah, this is a fantastic range from the Perrys and probably the foundation of like half of my Empire projects. So something I can strongly recommend. Warlord Games is another one that has a couple of really good offerings for Warhammer Empire dupes or alternate figures. And there are two kind of sub ranges within their pike and shot range that I can recommend you go take a look at. The first one is, well, pike and shot. They're English Civil War figures, but I don't think they're branded English Civil War. I think they're just called pike and shot. There are actually a ton of plastic kits that are really just like conversions or variations on a core set within really multiple ranges of Warlord, but this one specifically has several that are noteworthy, and it makes it kind of difficult to talk about the range, especially if we're just focused on multi-part plastics only. But there are two core kits to look at first, which is their pike and shot infantry regiment. And this is going to come with a bunch of handguns, and I think it's like 12 pikes. So maybe the only drawback here is that if you picked up multiple of these sets, you're going to end up with a disproportionately large number of handguns, which is true, again, historically to the English Civil War period. But if you're building a Warhammer Empire army, you're going to have like a 2-to-1 ratio of guns to pikes. So if that's something that bothers you, it's just something to be aware of. You can make a pretty sweet gun line with it, though. But the other set to look at is their pike and shot cavalry regiment. And I bring these two sets up specifically because they are all plastic and they're really cool. You should go check them out. The cavalry regiment also comes with like handguns that would make really nice pistoliers, even if you're, for example, mixing this in with your Perry War of the Roses stuff. But these two base sets are the ones that serve as kind of the foundation for these other sets. Like the cuirassiers that they have are like heavily armored versions of the cavalry. They have, for example, Swedish infantry, which is this core infantry base set, but it comes with, I think some different flag options, but also Morian armored helmets, has like metal sprues that come in the set. So there's a bunch of different variations, and you can kind of go with the ones that you like. But that's just something to be aware of, that these aren't like truly different kits. These are really just variations on these two core kits that I mentioned. So go check those ranges out. And as with the Perrys, which have, as I mentioned, pretty extensive metals line that you could use to supplement things like cannons or artillery characters, Warlord is much the same here, where they have a really extensive range of metals, if that's something that you'd like to do to supplement these plastic kits. And the second range to look at from Warlord is also in their pike and shot range, and this is it's under the Italian Wars category if you're on their website, and it's their Landsknechts, as we might say in America, or Landsknechte, I think is what it would be if my rusty German is not too bad. But these are actually figures that they picked up from Pro Gloria Miniatures. This was a Kickstarter that was done many years ago, and Warlord bought up the sprues and produced 3 separate kits. So there's their pikemen, missile troops, and Zweihanders. So it comes with polearms like halberds and bills, and then it also comes with the two-handed, like kind of greatsword looking weapons. And these are all the same bodies across these 3 boxes, just so you're aware. I think it's the same head options too, it just comes with different arms. Even the core pikeman set comes with a handful of handguns because it's built right into the pike sprue. But the missile weapons one adds a supplemental number of ranged weapons as well. One other cool thing about Warlord specifically is that they do true army starter sets like you might see from Games Workshop, for example. A lot of other companies do like army bundles, but really it's like one box repeated 5 times and you get a discount for it, and that's nice. But there's something to be said for like real army starter sets where it's like 3 different boxes, maybe like a couple of character blisters, maybe like a war machine in there too. I really like seeing that. That takes me back to my early wargaming days. And both of these ranges, the pike and shot, like English Civil War range, and the Landsknechts, have their own army like or battalion starter sets that you could take a look at if you're trying to pick up a bunch of figures all at once for a project. So anyway, certainly worth looking at the Warlord ranges there as well if this is something you're looking to do. Wargames Atlantic we've done lots of reviews of Wargames Atlantic sets. I can recommend them very highly. And they've got a number of sets that I think would work well in an Empire army. It's a little bit more difficult to like make an army exclusively from Wargames Atlantic, because they really only have a handful of sets to make, like, call it the core of an army, right? And the first one is their Conquistadors. So if you're trying to make like a Tillian or an Estalian army, or something like from the Border Princes if you're playing Warhammer, you could really build a whole army just out of this Conquistador set. So that's the one exception here, because that Conquistador set comes with some like spear, pike options. It comes with handguns, hand weapon and shield. It comes with crossbows. So truly a mind-boggling amount of bits are inside of that box, and it's a very high ratio of heads as well. I should mention if you're trying to create variety within an army. Anyway, very strong kit, the Conquistadors set. And then they also recently released 2 cavalry boxes to complement that one. There's the Conquistador Cavalry, which in terms of like design look very similar to the Conquistadors. As you might imagine, they're just like mounted variants of the Conquistadors on foot. And then they also released a Renaissance heavy cavalry set, which have more armor on them, like plate armor, almost more like the cuirassiers or like Warhammer Pistoliers if you're trying to look at options there. But they come with both lance options, or like spear options really, and they come with pistols that look pretty cool. So you can make some pretty great Pistoliers or like Empire Knights out of the Renaissance heavy cavalry set. And as I said, there's the Conquistador Cavalry set, which is very similar, but is kind of a lighter variant of that box. So I had thought about picking up both, giving the pistol arms to the Conquistador Cavalry and giving the lance arms to the Renaissance heavy cavalry. So food for thought on that. And then they also have the Guards set that we just took a look at together here last month. And if you are doing something like this, I do recommend you at least pick up like one of those sprues online, maybe from Sprue Dude or a different distributor. And the reason is because there's so much potential for characters out of these sprues. I would say like maybe like 2 of them are really more like Bretonnian looking or early medieval, but it's fantasy, so you know they're going for kind of a generic fantasy take here. But there's a couple of plate armor options that look pretty fantastic, and as I said, there's a couple of bits in there that really are conducive, I think, to character building. So definitely worth checking that one out too. And then we're getting into kind of like the weirder options, but you have their Lens Connect Ogres that they put out. I think this was part of a poll that they did, a community poll on like what kit that they want to put out. I haven't reviewed this one. I have seen the kit, I've handled it. It's cool. Like I do like it a lot. The only demerit that it gets is that it's got some like sci-fi bits in there, almost like they were afraid, because this is such a niche subject matter, I think that they were afraid to just put this kit out without any kind of like alternate options. But the like the fantasy core of this set I think is very strong. So and I know, of course, if you're playing like the old world, you're playing Empire, there's currently no entry for ogres in that list, but you could use them as unit fillers, or if you're playing Old Hammer, certainly old Hammer, then you would be able to use some ogres as well. So something worth checking out anyway, because the design certainly fits in with kind of the poofy sleeved Empire look, right? And then they also have their classic fantasy Halfling Militia, which we reviewed a couple of months ago. It's a very strong kit. It's one of their first ones, but I think one of their best still. And it would be great if you're doing like a Sterling theme army to do Halflings from the Moot, or just having, you know, Halfling Militia allied with your Empire troops. Something to think about. So some cool options there from Wargames Atlantic for, call it kind of like supplemental units for your Empire army. Now we're moving into, I mentioned we're going from like most to least obvious options, and we're getting toward the kind of least obvious options now. But I do want to talk about 2 other manufacturers here, and one is Fireforge Games. Fireforge, I've again known for their medieval line, which is very strong. I'm really a big fan of Fireforge and what they have been putting up. But they also have a fantasy line now called Forgotten Worlds, which has some dwarves in it, but it also has, undead, but also their Northmen warriors, which if you've not seen, kind of look like Game of Thrones House Stark infantry. So some might be surprised that I would suggest that these would make good Empire, but my first thought when I saw these kits was that I wanted to do a Warhammer Empire true Age of Sigmar Empire army, by which I mean like pre-Gunpowder Empire, because that's kind of the vibe I got from these guys, that I thought it would be like when Sigmar was actually around rallying up all these tribes, what soldiers of the Empire would have looked like at the time. There's a good argument you could use these for like Bretonnians as well, and you certainly could. but the vibe I get from them anyway is like, I don't know, early Germanic or Scandinavians, and so as I said, I think that would be more fitting to be early Empire. So yeah, they've got a couple of options there. They've got the Northmen warriors, they've got Northmen bowmen, which are the Northmen warriors with bows, as you might infer. They have Northmen cavalry, which do have like some barding options on there as well. Again, if you're trying to make like early Warhammer Empire, I think they'd be pretty fitting. But also, they have their Northmen rabble, which if you look at those sprues, I think would make really fantastic flagellants. And we haven't seen anything from anyone yet that would make good flagellants. And so it's nice to have an option here from Fireforge. And then now we're getting real zany, which is they also have their recently released Samurai Wars line. And I do want to make a quick like asterisk here on all of these Fireforge products, I should say, because they're like medieval stuff is pretty well scaled with like Perry miniatures, maybe a little bit bigger, but this stuff, their fantasy range and their samurai especially, are bigger, like much more comparable in scale to like 7th and 8th edition Warhammer figures, and I think would fit much better. Certainly the Samurai War stuff would fit much better on the 25mm bases that you would want to put most of an Empire army on in the old world. But their samurai look fantastic, and they've got, I think they're up to 6 kits now, which is their command group that they just released like a week ago. That gives you a lot of cool options there. They have Ashigaru with spears, the Yari, and they also have a separate kit for Ashigaru missile troops, which come with bows and handgun options that both look really, really good. There are also samurai and samurai missile troops. It's the same bodies shared between these different sets. It just comes with different arms. And then samurai cavalry as well. This all was based on a Kickstarter, and in the Kickstarter there was also a unit of like Ikko kind of like monks, and I haven't seen them yet. I don't know if they're like still in the pipeline or what, but again, going back to like a flagellant option, I think there's probably one going to be coming down the road here, so we'll see what gets released. But this is something that I'm ultimately intending to start up, is yet another Empire army, but all on 25mm bases for the old world specifically. So. And then let's talk about Northstar. So Northstar, if you're not familiar with them, have 2 ranges. There's their Frostgrave range, which is really designed for skirmish level play, because it's actually for the game Frostgrave, which is like Mordheim, but in a frozen city. And they also have Oathmark. And the main difference between those 2 sets is the Frostgrave ones are, as I said, more skirmish oriented. They come with 20 figures in a box typically, and then the gear, like the bits and equipment that come in it, are really not meant for unit building. It's more for making individuals, so you don't see like 5 spear options per 5 models, right? It's more like 1 spear, 2 hand weapons. You get lots of variety, but it's not designed to make a whole unit of something, whereas Oathmark very much does. It's meant for mass battles for the game Oathmark, and you do have, like, if you have a box of 30 models, you're gonna have 30 bow options, 30 spear options, 30 hand weapon options. So anyway, this is something to be aware of if you're not familiar with either of those ranges. And there's a couple that I could recommend specifically for, again, this maybe theoretical Empire project that you might be thinking about. The first is their Frostgrave Cultists 1 and 2 boxes. The 1 box was the first one they put out, of course, but the number 2 box is also females, or at least like androgynous in some cases, but there's female heads in it. And we did review the Cultist 2 set. I think that's the stronger of the 2, but I also think they would mix pretty well. And I think, going back to my point about not that many flagellant options, I think they would make really, really cool flagellants in a Empire army. So check out the Frostgrave Cultist 1 and 2 set. They also have Wizards 1 and 2, going back to my point about the guards making good characters. The Wizards 1 and 2 sets. The Wizards, as I said, the Wizards 1 was the first one, and the Wizards 2 is the later one that's also the stronger and also includes female options that would also mix very well. So check those out if you're looking to build some wizards for your army. And then they have their Ghost Archipelago. It's Frostgrave Ghost Archipelago. It seems like it's a separate range. I think it was a supplement that they put out, but even the boxes have like slightly different branding to them. And they have their Ghost Archipelago crewmen that really, I mean, in terms of design, really look like the 6th edition Warhammer Militia, like the Empire Militia box. The only thing it's lacking is firearm options like pistols. But as I said, if you're mixing these in with like, say, the Wargames Atlantic Renaissance Heavy Cavalry, those come with a bunch of pistol options, so you could blend some in here to make your own Empire Militia. It's a pretty cool kit. And then from their Oathmark range, they have 3 boxes of humans. There's going to be a 4th one coming, just so you're aware, in case you are trying to like base an entire army off of this, that there's going to be a heavy infantry set coming down the road, because that's what they do with all of their factions. Is they have a light infantry, a medium infantry, and a heavy infantry variant of the same subject matter. And so far, we've looked at their light infantry, we reviewed together, but they also have just a human infantry set, which come with like spear options. And then they have a cavalry box to complement the range as well. So I really like the design they've gone with here. Again, there's a good argument that you could use these for Bretonnians as well, or instead. But I think here, the vibe I get, again, is like early Empire, or like kind of maybe a more poor Empire province. So if that's something you're looking to do, you got a pretty great option from Northstar in their Oathmark line. And there you have it. So I did mention I have a little bit of a surprise here at the end, or like a bonus round, which is that we're not going to be going by manufacturer anymore, but I do want to talk about Warhammer Araby as a subject, because I didn't think I could make a whole separate video on this, but I do want to talk about it real quick, because there's actually 6 kits that I can recommend. Maybe, no, I guess it would be 7. 7 kits that I can recommend from a handful of different manufacturers here if you're looking to do Warhammer Araby. And the first one is going back to Perry Miniatures. They have their Afghan Tribesmen. This is, I think the branding in the box suggests this is from like 1800 to 1900. Again, that's the cool thing about fantasy, is that you can mix and match a bunch of like anachronistic historical periods, and who cares, right? So the cool thing about this Afghan Warrior set is that it comes with a lot of firearms, both in terms of like more modern ones, like, you know, late 19th century firearms, but also like Jazales that you would have seen in the region at the time. So lots of really neat options there, and lots of hand weapon and shield options as well. Some like crouching, floating poses, stuff like that would make for some cool militia. And then Wargames Atlantic also has their own, I think they're called Afghan Warriors. That's if you put them side by side, they're very similar kits in terms of the subject matter that they're covering, and even like the bits and options. I think they blend together very well. I've done that with my own, is mixed in some Perry stuff with some Wargames Atlantic stuff. So that's something that I can strongly recommend that you do too. And that one also comes with guns. So the ones that don't come with any firearms, again, maybe it's good to pick up both of those boxes if you're looking to do this, so that you can blend them in with some of these kits that don't, which are the recently released Victrix Islamic Infantry, which I think look beautiful. I know that there's been some criticism of them being kind of boring, or maybe not, maybe too generic looking, I think, is some of the criticisms that I've seen from the reviews. But again, for our purposes, for fantasy wargaming, we're not trying to represent a historical period here. I think they would serve as a fantastic foundation for an Araby army, as I said, especially if you're blending in some bits from some of these other manufacturers to make them a little bit more fantastical. And then Victrix also has an Islamic cavalry set. I mentioned the Islamic infantry. They also have cavalry that look really, really good. They've got lamellar armor, a lot of different weapon options, and the horses, as ever, from Victrix look really, really fantastic. So check both those kits out too. And then I can recommend 3 kits from Gripping Beast. So Gripping Beast has Arab spears and bows box, which is great for unit building. One like thing that you really have to give Gripping Beast credit for is their miniatures are so well built for wargaming purposes. Like, Victrix stuff is beautiful, but some of their earlier stuff that they made, by earlier I mean like earlier with their post-Viking production process, with I think a lot of like 3D computer design, like CAD stuff, they're really prone to snapping, like some of their earlier spears and stuff, which is why they've actually been thickening a lot of the weapons and spears in their more recent stuff. I think they actually said by like 20%. But the Gripping Beast stuff is like, I feel like you could throw it at a wall and it's not gonna sustain any damage whatsoever. And the same can be said of their Arab spears, just like I saw with their Vikings. They make really great shield walls. They're really durable figures, and I think they look good. Again, I think that the Victrix stuff looks better, but there's some trade-off there with durability. So anyway, it's certainly worth checking out the Gripping Beast stuff, even just to mix and match. I've said in other videos, that's one of my favorite things to do, is mix different manufacturers together. Some good opportunity here. And they also have heavy and light cavalry options from their Arab range, which I think would blend in very nicely with those Victrix cavalry as well. So lots to think about there if you're looking to do Araby as a variant on a Empire theme. And there you have it. That's those are my thoughts. I have some other kind of zanier ideas that were based on some of the things I've done, like using the Warlord Games Celts for flagellants, like I've done in my my army, or Macedonian Phalangites for pikemen to represent variant dogs of war units. Anyway, lots of crazy ideas like that. But as I said, this is a long enough video and I wanted to keep it semi-focused. And if this, as I said, if this is something that intrigues you, I can make tons and tons of videos like this on different subject matters. So just let me know what you'd like to see. But as ever, I really appreciate you dropping by for this one. And until next time, happy gaming.